Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on recycling in schools. So thanks very much for attending our webinar today. We expect that we'll be presenting for about an hour or so. And just a heads up that everybody's microphones have been muted to prevent any background noise. If you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in the question or the chat field, and we will get to these at the end of the webinar today. So today is a very special webinar as we are welcoming for the very first time on our series, Busch Systems' newest senior advisor, Alec Cooley. So Alec has been in the industry for well over 20 years and has lots of knowledge and experience with all things recycling, especially in the school setting. So today this webinar is being recorded as well, and you will be receiving an email after the webinar with the link that you can access that. So today I'm going to be speaking about recycling programs for K through 12 schools with more of a focus on how to optimize your program. And then Alec is going to follow up with a focus on colleges and universities with more of a focus on bin infrastructure and also some really successful case studies. So recycling practices and programs can really be effortless once established, and recycling is one of the main ways that students can interact with their school's green and sustainable initiatives. Recycling and waste reduction in schools really brings a sense of community and identity to that school by being able to see things like we recycle. Schools really show pride in their recycling efforts and their commitment to the environment. So having an established recycling program improves the status of the school and also creates a cleaner and healthier environment. So when you are assessing your recycling program, it's really important to note the difference between other public settings. So in schools, you have this younger generation who are really keen on green initiatives, but they require a little bit of direction and clear messaging as well. So it's really important to establish that sorting the recycling and waste is really the responsibility of everybody, not only the students and not only the teachers. So people have different roles and involvement, and everyone is responsible for participating and for doing the right thing. And all students and staff should be involved throughout the whole process from start to finish. There are a lot of different aspects for consideration here, including the dynamic of who is the person that's going to lead this program and who is the person that's responsible for the program. And being able to institutionalize this is really important to consider in the early planning stages. So by laying out this hierarchy of roles and related responsibilities, it reduces the risk of the program and all the hard work really falling short. So for example, who is the person that is next in this leadership role if a teacher leaves? The program, the time, and the effort really still need to exist for it to be a success. And usually in a college setting, this program champion is a paid position. However, in a public school system, this position is typically unpaid or voluntary. So now we're just going to run a little bit of a poll question here. So just bear with me as I get this up. So what is your role with recycling at your school or campus? Collecting recyclables, recycling education, managing overall recycling programs, all of the above, or other. So this is just going to give us a sense of who our audience is today that we're speaking to. So it looks like most are coming in with the role of recycling education at 36%, and about a third all of the above, and 20% other. Okay. All right, good to know. So moving on here to recycling team roles. So having a successful team for recycling includes leadership opportunities, operational roles, and also education roles. So all these different roles are keys to success in terms of waste management and diversion. The leadership candidate is usually the one who communicates the responsibilities to all the school staff and students. There's usually at least one person in this kind of role, and they establish a culture of environmental awareness at the school. Usually this person is investing a lot of time and energy into the environmental projects in different campaigns. The operations candidate is usually responsible for assessing and communicating services, supplies, support, and also communicates responsibilities to the other operational staff. And finally, the education role is responsible for communicating and promoting participation among both staff and students. So having administrative support is really critical, as they have a really great deal of influence over whether or not staff and students have the resources and the flexibility to promote waste reduction and diversion. Schools with principals that are involved and supportive show the best results in waste reduction. So by having a priority of waste management at the board level, this is a direct reflection of the priorities set out by individual schools. And we see cases of really high performing school boards that have regular waste audits and also really engaged environmental coordinators that are employed at this board level. And this results in year over year successes in their recycling program. So oftentimes the primary recycling goals of an elementary school or a high school include sending all organic and recyclable material to facilities where they're composted or recycled. And number two, reducing the amount of waste generated by the school overall. So in a school environment, you really have this unique opportunity to incorporate recycling into your lesson plans by integrating these real world recycling activities and hands-on experience into your curriculum. You can use competitions to promote proper recycling. This is a great way to make student action projects to connect with classroom learning and also just inspire school spirit all throughout the year. So the goal is to reward the participants for recycling correctly and not only for recycling more. So games and field trips can be used to learn more about recycling and compost. And then lesson plans can be focused around composting, proper recycling, and reducing. Different disposed materials can be laid out, and then the students can have the opportunity to properly sort what goes where, and then give the opportunity for discussion and working as a team. Another project could involve setting up a composting program from start to finish. So this would include properly placing the containers, creating signage, educational material, and also the first introduction of organic material. You can incorporate the teachings of litter prevention and pair it with a school area cleanup. And then an idea for promoting recycling would be to ask the question, how much paper does our classroom generate? And then actually count how much paper is in the recycling bin, and then have students graph that on chart paper. You can also talk about using scrap paper in the recycle bin as paper that students can actually use to write on. And then think about using the paper that has rips or spills, holes, and then incorporating the flaws into their art projects. Another important aspect is to consider to get students and teachers to actually pledge to achieve a recycling goal. So set a class-wide or a school-wide goal, and then this gives a sense of authority or formality to the recycling efforts. And then regular progress reports can be given toward the goal and to reward success. So by evaluating your program on this annual basis, it really uncovers areas that can be improved upon. So here are some simple suggestions for recycling initiatives. So recycling bins placed directly beside the teacher's desk to ensure monitoring. Having copy rooms, mail rooms, art rooms, these having larger containers. A scrap paper tray in the classrooms to ensure that both sides of the paper are used. And then setting goals for the school, like we just talked about, like reducing paper by 10% or reducing the amount of hand towels purchased by 20%. And then finally, hosting a waste-free lunch so students can explore ways to reduce food waste and think about packaging which can be unnecessary. So efforts should also include the cafeteria as well. So with sorting stations and school garden composting projects. By instating an organics program, this produces a huge decline in landfill waste generation due to the high volume of food waste in the waste stream. So consider a classroom worm bin. In cafeterias, 20 to 30% of the waste that comes into that environment is actually whole uneaten or unopened items. And the worms can help to turn this food waste into valuable compost for school gardens. And then efforts should also be considered to reduce food waste and not only just composting. And it's a good idea in the cafeteria setting that these areas have a compost station, a recycling, a waste, a pail labeled for liquids, and then a separate spot for trays. So by having these different disposal options, you don't have to overload the trash container, which makes it a lot easier on custodians physically and also improves servicing time. So compost bins should be lined with a compostable bag, and then recycling bins should be lined with no bag, and finally trash with a black bag and recycling, if necessary, with a clear bag. So if staff and students are sorting correctly, then no bag should be necessary, and then this prevents the plastic bags from getting tangled up into the machinery at the MRFs. And green bin volunteers can be stationed at these different sorting stations during busy meal times. And these students can be required to have to pass a test before they're accepted into this sought after volunteer position. Okay, so now we're going to take a look specifically at elementary schools. So we're going to look at some different factors that can be considered when implementing a recycling program at this level. So integrating this knowledge at this young age is extremely beneficial, as there is a really great chance that these students are going to keep these ethics for life. So this generation is the future of many things, and that includes sustainability. So it seems that elementary schools often obtain tactics and ways to encourage recycling that go further than secondary and post-secondary schools. So we gathered some ideas of some schools' projects that can be given as suggestions that can help to improve or even start up a recycling program. So here in this photo, these students here use materials from their recycle bin for their art projects. So some ideas for children around the age of kindergarten to grade 3 would be to use clear and bright labeling and signage. So pictured here is our popular wastewater container, and this is really popular among school systems. And in this particular example, it's been customized with signage and colors for younger students to be a lot more appealing and to promote recycling and compost. So using imagination and creativity gets students more excited than ever to engage in recycling. So by using characters, stories, games, role play, this helps to educate as well as encourage environmental stewardship. And it's really important to keep the younger grades involved. So for example, children may use scrap paper from their recycling for their arts and crafts, and then the teacher later has a discussion on it and asks the question, why do we use the paper from our recycling bins? In this pictured example here, this is a pop can tab art that was incorporated into these snake creations. So based on the Ontario curriculum for environmental education, children demonstrate by saying, doing, and representing. And then educators can react by responding, challenging, and extending. So it's really important that educators are involved and on board. So students are always looking up to their teachers, especially at this young age. So the support of and the promoting of recycling programs by staff makes a huge difference. And this is an example of a really pretty mural that's actually made from plastic water bottle lids. So we're going to take a look at recycling in secondary schools. So recycling in this setting really varies since there's a lot of different aspects to consider, including population, morals, beliefs, staffing. So having actively run student eco teams, this shows a huge success rate in encouraging recycling. The team can conduct waste audits, collect results, and come up with different ways to increase recycling and organic disposal. Some high schools have competitions among staff to see who can make the least number of photocopies and then reward the staff member afterwards. Classroom competitions, such as which classroom generates the least amount of waste for rewards like a pizza party or movie afternoon, is always a good idea as well. So we see outdoor classrooms being a lot more popular in in elementary schools, but we see a lot of outdoor educational courses within high schools. And these programs are great, but they're really only reaching a certain population of the school. So if we have more schools investing in outdoor classrooms, or even teachers making an effort to teach outdoor lessons, then the students can really benefit from these experiences. And when there's a focus on environmental and sustainable topics, proper disposal is just bound to improve, as most students really take pride in that environment in these different outdoor areas and don't want them to be polluted with waste. Also, the importance of creating programs and promoting them. So it's nearly impossible to gather everyone together. So campaigns, bulletin boards, posters, announcements, flyers. These are all really great ways to reach that larger population of the school. So when selecting the type of recycling program, it's really important that you coordinate collection services for materials that are leaving the school and consider how is it that we can involve students from this standpoint. So hauling services could include self-haul, subscription to a hauler, or arranging pickups for recyclable material. If your school already has a contract with a hauler, you can just communicate with them directly or your overall school board to see if they provide recycling services as well. And if your local government solid waste office has a curbside program, then you could look at the option of having your school join that. And then it's always a good idea to contact these recycling facilities first to see what materials it is that they're collecting and what are the services that are available. So now switching gears a little bit, I just want to touch on a few programs that are available for schools to participate in to boost recycling efforts. So the first one here is Keep America Beautiful's Recycle Bowl. So they host this competition each year, and it's a great way to motivate students. It's a national K-12 competition of who can recycle the most and who can recycle properly between these different schools. So by invigorating student participation, the competition helps to establish new recycling programs within schools and then increase participation at those schools that already do recycle. The program has had a huge impact since its inception, with 2.2 million students reached, 25 million pounds of material recycled, and 4,400 schools participating. And then they also offer lesson plans, games, fact sheets, and different activities on their website. So the Canadian Coalition for Green Schools, so they contribute their time and expertise to support communities in the transformation of their schools. So this includes initiatives like the Greenest School in Canada competition, and they name the top 3 Canadian schools that lead the country each year. And then the winning school receives $2,000 in prize money to put toward their Green School project. And then they also organize the Global Twinning Initiative, which is where 2 classrooms at the same grade level from different countries are actually paired up. And then the students are able to have conversation around recycling and other sustainability concepts. So America Recycles Day, this involves students and schools taking the pledge to commit to reducing, reusing, recycling, and also buying recycled. So far this year, they've had 75,000 people already take the pledge. America Recycles Day is November 15th, and the pledge includes learning what materials are collected for recycling, acting within the next month to reduce the amount of waste produced, and also buying products that are made with recycled content. And then additionally, in the following month, you're encouraged one family member or one friend to take the pledge as well. So Ontario Eco Schools, this is an environmental education and certification program here in our province, and it encourages schools to adopt this culture of environmental awareness. So waste minimization is really a key component to this all-around program, and schools receive recognition for their different efforts. So in this one particular case study, 40 elementary schools and 9 secondary schools were provided with provided a 24-hour sample of their different, the waste that they generated. And the data revealed that there was a huge difference between waste generation from the eco schools compared to the non-eco schools. So on average, the eco schools produce 57% less combined waste than the non-eco schools. And a key factor to success was consistent engagement and support from teachers, administrators, and board level officials. And the principals at these schools particularly had a huge influence over the mentality that was associated with their waste diversion program. So the level of importance on responsible waste management can directly impact students' lifelong attitudes in this regard. So we can see here in this graph that the platinum eco schools, which is the blue color, generated the lowest amount of waste compared per student compared to the non-eco schools in purple. So St. Margarets School here in Barrie, Ontario, it has been a platinum eco school for 4 years. They have 467 students and produce only 2.5 kilograms of waste per day. So they focus overall on waste reduction, seeking to eliminate materials in addition to diverting them. So they look at things like reducing the number of beverage containers. They've completely banned disposable water bottles and also encourage parents to pack lunches in reusable containers. So students are always included in these waste management initiatives through different learning opportunities. They are taught about waste reduction and proper recycling beginning in kindergarten, and then their annual school photo is always done with an environmental theme. And then this just stresses the importance and awareness that they have of environmentalism. And they were actually named the Greenest School in Canada in 2015. So I just wanted to finish off my portion of today's webinar by mentioning our resource center. So this is a completely free resource that is available to you. The Resource Center is a collection analytics software that was developed a couple years ago here at Busch Systems. So in addition to giving you the ability to track the waste and recyclables that you're producing in your school, it also gives you access to lesson plans, how-to guides, blogs, videos, all stuff that we've created here by our team. So you can sign up completely free for the Resource Center, and I'm always more than happy to set up one-on-one calls with you to walk you through if you are interested. So please feel free to reach out after the webinar and we can set that up. Okay, so that wraps up my portion of the webinar today. Just bear with us here. I'm just going to transfer it over to Alec, and then Alec, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, hello everybody. Hope you can hear me. Again, my name is Alec Cooley. As Syvannah said, I just joined Busch Systems in the last month. I'm going to be serving as a senior advisor to the company, hope to be a resident expert to help just inform the company and the products that we manufacture, but also to be a resource as well, along with Syvannah, to help individual schools and programs to help build and maximize what they do. So I'm excited to be involved with Busch Systems and to be with you here today. So just as one housekeeping item, I think I still need waiting for control of the screen here. Okay. Savannah, I think I still need you to assign the control of the cursor over to my computer.
Hey, Alec, I just transferred control over, so let me know if it's working. If not, I can just switch the slides for you.
Okay, I think it is working now. Great,
okay,
thanks.
Perfect.
Good. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to focus on two areas. Again, specific to colleges and university, but some of this is going to apply universally as well. What I want to talk about first off is on a macro level, what it takes to move a collegiate recycling program from a beginning stage to intermediate, advanced. I'm just a very rough kind of breakout, describe some of the characteristics that define how I'm thinking of college programs between beginning, intermediate, and advanced. Syvannah mentioned later in my slides, I'll switch and talk a little bit more specifically about bin infrastructure and steps that you can take to improve the bins that you have out there so that you're collecting more material. But to start on a high level, here's the system I would use to define the types of programs. And these tend to be stages that many, if not most, college university programs evolve through over time. Oftentimes they start as ad hoc efforts. There are advocates. It might be a student group, or it might be a professor or somebody who really takes an interest in this. They're able to get some grants. They're able to put some bins out there, get some seed money. And it tends to be very, accomplish what you can with the limited resources that you have. Oftentimes you're working with volunteers. There's not necessarily support from the administration. But you're able to at least get the ball rolling with collecting cans of bottles and paper and other materials. Then as programs evolve over time, they tend to hire dedicated staff, people who are actually in charge of doing that collection day in, day out, to have a recycling coordinator. You start to spread out and focus on other initiatives beyond simply collecting recycling. You're looking at reuse and other initiatives. They start developing outreach and education programs to raise greater awareness, not simply just collecting material. And as you can see, these obviously are very subjective, but oftentimes you can see these programs, they're increasing the amount of material that they're recovering and diverting as they advance to these stages. And then finally, you get to the programs that really are advanced, that have sophisticated programs, and they're able to recover a large percentage of their waste stream. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along. So again, starting off with a macro level focus, I would suggest there are three primary things that are required to really move a school beyond that beginning stage. It's building a team, it's doing strategic planning, it's cultivating support. This is a very complex topic, there are, for many colleges and universities, this is a process that takes years, if not decades, and it requires, an investment over time. And so there's a lot involved with this, but I would boil it down to these being three important factors that I'll talk about. So I'll start off with building a team. Oftentimes when you're starting out, again, you have just an advocate, somebody, a small group of people who are interested in this. But one of the features of a program that really takes it to the next level is having somebody who's a dedicated professional who's running the program. That person does not necessarily need to be a full-time dedicated or multiple staff, even if it's somebody who just has a quarter of their time is dedicated to this while they're also managing custodial or other aspects. But what's important is having somebody whose job description is to be thinking strategically about how you advance the program. There's somebody who makes the effort to do webinars like these, to go to conferences, to read journals, to look and see what other campuses are doing. It's somebody who is there with an eye towards not simply putting out bins and making sure they get emptied, but be thinking about how do we move to the next level. So I'm a strong advocate for getting to that point where you've got somebody who this is part of their job description and part of their mandate. Beyond that individual, it's very important to have stakeholders on board in general across the campus. One of the observations I made as somebody who managed the recycling for a university in California a number of years ago, you're in a position where really you have a reason to interact with pretty much anybody on the campus, from the custodian up to the president of the university. And it's about getting those people engaged and getting their support in a couple different ways. One, you want to make sure that you understand how waste and recycling is happening in their sector of the campus and how they experience it, because that informs how you evolve that program, how you make changes. You want them to be your informal advisors in a sense. Also, they are your ambassadors. You want to have, you want them, if you can get key people within different areas of campus to be engaged with your program as part of a committee or even just informally, they can help to be that ambassador who goes back to all of their colleagues to make sure that they understand what the priorities are and can help to advance the initiatives that you're doing. And as I said, this really applies on all different levels. It's making sure that you've got folks in the facilities department obviously engaged, but it's also working with the auxiliaries, housing, athletics. Having student groups involved is real important in getting their input. Contractors, haulers, even on the academic side, which I'll talk a little bit more in a moment. But again, the high level point is that this is not something that just happens in a silo. You want people to get invested in the program, to have a stake in it, and you do that by engaging folks across the campus. Strategic planning. So there are a number of different levels to this, but again, it all comes down to thinking this is more than simply putting out bins and making sure they get collected. Having a vision and a plan of where you're going to take the program over time is critical to actually going beyond collecting some isolated amounts of cans and bottles. Syvannah mentioned this earlier when she was talking from a K through 12 context, but one of the things that's really important about goals is both it helps to set something that you work against, and that is can be an important driver to go beyond just what you have to do, but to make sure that you are really getting things done. Goals are also important though for engaging the rest of the campus and communicating those goals to everybody across the institution. Whether that could be, we want to increase the amount of paper we're recycling by 10% this year, or if it is you're looking to get, increase our percentage of outdoor recycling bins by 25% this year. You want to have goals that people can rally, and it becomes a focal point for what you communicate, and getting those people invested into what you're doing, not simply just doing this within your own office. It's crucial that you make those goals achievable. You don't want to talk about, we're going to achieve zero waste in the next 20 years. You want to come up with something much more specific, something where you can score a victory, where you can actually make that accomplishment, because when you succeed with that, that becomes part of the momentum that again helps to sell the program and get more people invested in it. In setting those goals, prioritizing is hugely important. There are a couple things I would suggest. Obviously, you want to accomplish it all. You want to capture as much as you can of the waste stream, but there are definitely diminishing returns on different types of initiatives. Oftentimes, students might want to focus on doing something that's real tangible, like let's collect food waste. We want to capture all this, but realistically, what is the effort it takes to capture that? Are you going to put a lot of energy into doing something like food recovery while at the same time letting all of the paper go into the landfill? Or can you get more bang for your buck by starting with materials like paper, cans, and bottles, where there's much fewer logistics and moving parts necessary to get those implemented? So so understanding where you're likely to have the greatest impact is important. To go back to the point I made a moment ago, it's being able to point to those victories and show that that you demonstrate the value of what you're collecting. That helps to get input from administrators and others to move forward beyond that point. I can't advocate enough on the importance of doing waste audits and just doing some basic efforts to understand what is actually in the waste stream. You can anecdotally see, yes, there's paper and there's cans and bottles, but when it comes time to prioritize, are you going to put a lot of effort into collecting plastic bottles if it turns out that there's not a lot of plastic bottles on the campus? You only know that when you do waste audits. And waste audits can happen on many different levels. In a perfect world, you've got a big budget, you might bring in a consultant, you do a formal study, but that can even just be informal, working with a class group to do less formal audits, or at the most basic, even just on your own, walking through offices, walking through different settings, and just looking at visually to scan and really get familiar with what's actually showing up in the waste bins in a given area, and using that to help prioritize initiatives that you take on. As I mentioned earlier, as your program advances, you want it to be about more than simply collecting cans of bottles and paper. There's a wide world of activities and initiatives that you can take on that all get you closer towards a zero waste or a significant diversion. Having waste prevention programs, things like in computer labs, having pre-quotas so that students, rather than being able to print as many sheets of paper as they want through a semester, they have a quota. Stuff like that have been shown to dramatically decrease the amount of paper that gets wasted in the first place and that even needs to be recycled. Having reuse programs, having a surplus property auctioning program or store, or office supply exchanges, having a system where people can donate file folders and other equipment they no longer need that can then be made available to other departments. So all those are initiatives that help to make your program more robust and get you further down the line. And then one can never understate the importance of actually getting out there, engaging people. To simply put out bins and start collecting material, you're always going to get some response, but but the more that you communicate with people, both what can be recycled and how to recycle, as well as on the motivational side, doing some of the initiatives similar to what Syvannah described, having competitions, other efforts to help motivate communicate the why part of recycling are critical to taking programs to the next level. I'm also a big advocate of documenting what you're doing on both ends. On the front end, you're putting together that plan and publishing it, and taking advantage of opportunities to communicate it. Get a story into the campus paper, social media. Let people know these are what our goals are, and this is the roadmap for how we plan to get there. Again, it's all about getting people invested into the program and into the outcomes. Measuring is also hugely important, and oftentimes this becomes a lower priority just because of resources, which is totally understandable. But one of the ways that a program improves over time is to make the effort to measure what you're actually doing. So when the bins get emptied, tracking that quantity and being able to tally that up at the end of the year is important on many different levels to help you professionalize a program. And again, that's something that over time, that process can professionalize and improve itself. Even at the beginning, if it's just simply doing some basic tracking, how many carts get emptied in a given week, or how many times are bins emptied, dumpsters are emptied from given buildings. And over time, taking advantage of opportunities to write into hauling contracts that that the hauler needs to actually provide weights at the end. Over time, building out those mechanisms so that you're getting more accurate, more time-specific data. So continue on. Finally, the last point I want to make on this macro level is coming back to the cultivating support. I can't underline and emphasize enough how getting people invested into your program is critical to moving it forward. One of the pieces of feedback that I often hear, and that you may have experienced on your own campus, is that you're going to all this effort trying to get people to recycle, and it seems like people just, they kind of respond, they kind of don't. It doesn't seem to be a priority. Part of this comes down to a culture. Do people believe in recycling? Are they invested in it? And it's when you have that culture, that's very much wind in your sails. But when you don't, it feels like you're just talking against a brick wall sometimes. And so having a strategy for how you build that culture, how you build that interest is critically important, because ultimately that's what leads to green lights and gets people to actually participate on a more meaningful level. So you do that on a couple different levels. You're starting with simply demonstrating the value. Why is it that we have this program? What are we trying to accomplish? Think about that and really be careful to articulate what that value proposition is, and understand that it's different for different audiences. For instance, with administrators, money might be the number one thing. Oftentimes, what they see is the cost of a hauling contract for recycling, or they see the cost of a staff person, but are they seeing that in the context of the money that's being saved from the reduced tipping fees for trash? So taking that information and being able to package it in a holistic fashion that helps decision makers to really understand the full picture and not simply just the limited cost that comes to them. Other ways that you communicate that value or that people may perceive on campus, one is think about the mission of the institution. It's about educating people. So working with professors to integrate recycling into class curriculum, work with student groups, service learning projects, all things that engage students is one more way that you're showing what we're doing as a program benefits the university overall. If for a facilities department, that value proposition might be, how do you make sure that their operations are more efficient and go smoother, and they're not adding headaches and more work to grounds crew or maintenance workloads. So having a simple, efficient system to get this material in and out and off to the recycling center is something that builds support from a facilities perspective. Obviously, there are many different examples and different interests, but thinking of those terms is important to getting support. And then I come back to a point I made earlier about communicating your progress. Look for those opportunities to market your program. Don't just assume that because people see a recycling bin that is going to work for them. Make sure that they know what you're actually accomplishing. We talked about setting goals. Communicate your progress towards those. if you have set a challenge for the campus that we're going to recover at least 50% of paper generated on campus this year, make sure that that is being communicated when you actually achieve that. Social media posts, get a story in the campus paper. I'm an advocate of putting together an annual report, something that looks nice. It's got, it's nicely laid out with graphic design, and it shows this is what we accomplished. We collected X tons this year. We saved X number of dollars. Looking for those opportunities to communicate and get your progress back in front of people is important. I'm also a fan of looking for those opportunities to get recognition for your efforts. If your state recycling association or sustainability organization does awards, make sure that you're putting in, you're submitting applications to receive that recognition, because those are all things that you can again turn around and you can communicate back out to stakeholders on your campus to show what you're achieving. Last point I would make here, and this really is something that's somewhat unique to colleges and universities, is recognizing who has what type of power to get things done on campus. If you are working in facilities and you're a recycling manager, you've got a chain of command that you have to answer to, and then there's a certain point where you have to respectfully sit back and let decision makers make their decisions. Students don't have that restriction, and one of the big motivators on campus is when the president hears from the student government, or they hear from the student club that we want recycling, we value this, we want this to happen on our campus. You think strategically about how you align interests with students who support the program, and again, make them the advocates to help sell it. So with that, I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to talk more specifically about recycling bins. Go back real quick. So this is something that applies obviously beyond simply colleges and universities, but I think there are some important points. When your recycling program is first starting out, I've already referred to how it tends to be more of an ad hoc affair. You score the victories where you can. You get some funding, so you put some bins out at one location, or maybe bins get donated from another source, and you're able to put some more out in other locations. But oftentimes, over the first number of years, that can be a very hodgepodge system, and you end up with an infrastructure that is good to get you started. It's getting recycling out there. You're able to collect some material, but oftentimes that system is going to perform okay. It's not going to ultimately get you very far, because you have really, one of the important things is about participation, and to get people to actively recycle all the time, not just some of the time. One of the ways that you do that is education. Another way to do that is by having the infrastructure that just indirectly motivates and guides people to do the right thing. The other thing I would say about this is that recycling bins are the visible, tangible item that people see and think of with recycling. It's your opportunity to market your program and to market your brand. If you think about it, when you go to a McDonald's or another location, they use the same architectural design from one location to the next. That's part of their brand, and that's part of how you get people to invest and become and to participate, or be a customer. So think of your recycling bins in the same way. You want them to look nice. You want them to be inviting and communicate that this is something that I want to be part of. So let's start off with just basic 101 about recycling bins. And for the moment, I'm going to talk really specifically about how you motivate people to actually participate with the design of your infrastructure. So if we step back, there are two primary factors that drive recycling. It's not so much about getting people excited and wanting to recycle. There are many studies have been done that show that the vast majority of people are willing to recycle. It's really about removing barriers. The number one, obviously, is lack of convenience. If there isn't a recycling bin, and on the floor that your office is on, and you have to walk all the way downstairs, you're going to lose a certain percentage of people. The other big barrier is just confusion, especially, many of you have probably experienced this now, where contamination is a huge focus, and it's so important to get people not to throw the wrong items into the recycling bins. But when that changes over time, or when you go from your home where it's okay to put glass into the bin, but now you go to campus and it's not okay to put glass in, or whatever that is, every time people go from one location to the next, that clouds their understanding of what they're supposed to do. And so any efforts that you can do to address that are critically important. And one way that you address confusion is just understanding how you actually reach people and get them to respond in a specific setting. In a public area where you've got bins that people will see and they walk past and they go on to the next building, you don't necessarily have the same opportunity that you do, say, with a residential home cart, where you can train them on, this is what goes into your bin, and it's always the same. If somebody's walking again from one location to the next, that can change constantly. And so in that situation, you don't have the chance to necessarily educate them in depth. You really it's about just getting them to recognize there is a difference between a trash bin and a recycling bin. You want them to distinguish each other as quickly as possible, and without requiring people to focus a lot of attention on it, because as this graphic shows, that's just not how the majority of people think. They're not stopping to study a bin. They're not looking to get a PhD in recycling. They just want to get rid of the item that's in their hand. So what I'm going to talk through is just real quickly go over some of the best practices that help to do that, to communicate, this bin is for recycling, this one is for trash. Here's what goes in the simplest terms that somebody who is giving half second of their attention can relate to. I'll start off with just placement. It's critically important that the recycling and trash bins be immediately next to each other. When you separate bins out, you have to recognize that people are not going to go out of their way. And that might even mean simply a foot or two over are not going to go out of their way. If you look at the bin in the lower right-hand corner, this is taken in New York City with the blue and the green bin. Both of those are recycling, but if you imagine somebody walking down a sidewalk, they're going to use that green bin probably 90% of the time, because they don't want to walk around the landscaping or walk out of their way to get to the blue bin. So where the bin is placed is really important. The photo just above it shows an example of a recycling bin and a trash bin. And you can see the recycling bin has a lot of trash plateaued on top of it, simply because people are not willing to walk 5 feet out of their way necessarily. And this is, every circumstance is a little different, but it's a fairly universal aspect. Color distinction is also hugely important. The bins need to be able to distinguish themselves with a split-second attention. When they are the same color, that forces people to stop and study and think, wait a second, these two gray bins, one is recycling, one's not. Don't assume that simply having the little triangle there or having the words recycling will do it. So having a real clear color distinction is important. There is no standard in this country of what color is recycling, but there's a lot of evidence. Both Keep America Beautiful did a survey a few years ago that showed most people associate blue with recycling. And I would also say anecdotally that the majority of programs, if they tend towards one color or not, it tends to be blue. So that's one piece of information I would offer. I would also say, though, with this point, that oftentimes what's most important is that the color and other attributes are consistent and they match people's expectations somewhere else. So, for instance, if recycling is green at people's homes, if the residential carts are green, that might be one reason to consider making green your standard on your campus, simply to be consistent with them. But there are a number of variables that influence that. Using clear, simple labels is another very important point. I'll point out a couple things. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, the 3-bin system there, the term commingle may mean something to a recycling manager, but for the most part, it means nothing to the average person walking down the street. If you're hoping to collect cans and bottles in that chamber in the middle, that's not effective wording to do that. If you look at the bin on the lower left-hand corner, this is actually taken from a local airport in Charleston, South Carolina, where I am. And in this bin instance, you can see there's just confusing labels. There's two different layers of messaging, and they conflict with each other. I love the one that says trash only, and then above that says other recycling. Anybody who can successfully figure out what to do with that is a better person than most of us. Another point I would make is that depending on the setting, you have an opportunity to either give people a lot of information or you don't. So for instance, if it's in somebody's office, and this is the bin they're going to have at their desk side, you have a greater likelihood of giving them a lot of information and then taking advantage of that. But if somebody's just walking down, walking through the quad, you're not going to stop to look at detailed lists of what can go in and what can't. In that kind of case where people really are, it's transitory, you want to give them just the very basic, most fundamental information they need: bottles of cans, compost, trash, whatever that might be in your situation. Restrictive openings are also important. If you look at the bin on the left-hand side, it's just a wide open. That's much more likely to invite people just simply casually tossing without ever stopping to look what goes inside it. Having the restrictive openings is important just to make people slow down and actually focus on what they're doing. Setting standards is very important. So the two examples I'll share here, one is from University of Michigan, another from Dalhousie University. In both cases, they've over time, they've put in place a new set of standards so that automatically all bins will be blue, all for recycling, or black for trash. They instead of having many different styles or types of bins, they come up with the guidelines that say that it's either going to be the more of the plastic utilitarian style, like a waste watcher, or it might be a higher end bin, but it's got to be one or the other. And again, it's for consistency. It helps people to recognize this is a recycling bin when they walk from one area to the next. There's a lot that goes into developing this type of standard. I'll point out that both universities have published guidelines of how they do it on their campus that you can find on their websites. Feel free to email us on the side. I'm happy to share with you the link so you can see those guidelines. But these are hugely important. It's also important to try and work through the administrative process to get them formalized, not just a casual, we do this, but having policy that says, even if it's a new construction or somebody else, a different department is purchasing bins, that they are also required to use these standards and not simply just your facilities department. So when it comes time to develop those standards, something I can't emphasize enough is the importance of making sure that the style and the design addresses the best practices that we're talking about. All too often, the decision may be driven by the aesthetics, which is very reasonable and something that can be easily addressed with the right steps. But what you don't want to have is a situation where you're simply choosing what looks pretty, and you'll worry later on about whether they function or not. That's how you end up spending a lot of money and getting an infrastructure that just fills up with trash. And I love this photo just as to illustrate the point. If you're really up close, you can see the labels that say that the bin in the front is for newspapers and magazines, but you really have to concentrate to know the difference. If you have two different green bins, is one for recycling, is one for trash? So without going into it too in depth, I just want to emphasize that you can't let form dictate without considering the function. So a couple operational points for the designs that are important. And again, there's more than just these, but some ones that pop out. Ergonomics is hugely important. If you have a larger bin with a greater capacity, you want to make sure that the collection crew are going to be able to empty it. If you have to lift a bag up directly up above the lip of a bin and it's full of glass, and it's 40 gallons or so. That's a real hazard issue. So you want to look at either bins that could be tipped over to empty them out, or that have side doors that you can open up and just pull the bags out. Having bins that aesthetically look nice, so that some bins can be set up to have hooks that hold the bags internally, so you don't have to drape them over the lip, and they just look a little funky. Liquids, if you have a bin that's outdoor, you don't want to have an opening that faces up in an uncovered area, because as soon as it rains, you've just added 10 pounds of water that you don't need to be lifting up. Another thing that's crucially important is make sure that the bins are connected to each other and cannot walk away. If you simply put two bins next to each other, the custodian might decide that, you know what, I want to have the trash bin over on this side of the hallway, and bins will move on their own. And the whole point that I made earlier about twinning the bin, you start losing that effect, and you start instead collecting trash inside your recycling bins. So having a system where the bins can be locked to each other and you can't move one without moving the other is another value point. The last point I want to make is here, and I know we're getting to the end of our time, is with some more advanced things to consider with your infrastructure going forward. Early on, when you're first setting up your bins, you're grafting recycling onto a system that's designed for collecting trash and for doing that efficiently, which is great. But over time, one of the things that marks a more sophisticated program that successfully collects more recycling and cleaner recycling is stepping back and thinking, how do we change and alter this system so that it's not simply about the most efficient way of getting trash out of the building, but it's the most efficient way of collecting clean recycling. I'll cite a couple examples. Keep America Beautiful did a study a few years ago that showed when you change the type of bin that's at a desk side and go from just having a trash bin by itself, or even having a recycling bin next to that's equal size, this system of having a larger recycling bin and a smaller trash like this, which can clip on, this was shown, and on a statistically significant basis, to reduce both the amount of contamination by about 20%, and also to increase the percentage of recyclables that got into the recycling bin itself, as opposed to showing up in the trash. And for instance, with paper, was shown to go to almost zero, the amount of paper going into the trash, simply because it doesn't fit into that little trash. So this is a step, this type of infrastructure, it's something that gets people to do the right thing just intuitively, without even having to do a lot of education. It's just something that guides them towards the right activity. Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, or IUPUI is one school that has implemented this. A number have, and they showed, just from doing the pilot, the first semester they implemented this pilot in one of their administration buildings, that it helped to had a dramatic impact on their recycling. They saw the recycling rates on average about 60%, versus the rest of campus comparable buildings where it was less than half that percentage. So a real significant impact. Another example would be with classroom buildings. A lot of universities are experimenting with simply taking the trash bin out of classrooms altogether. Because one reason is that if you need to put a recycling bin next to every trash, that gets expensive and that gets hard to do. But if you eliminate unnecessary trash bins, that's another technique you could use to do that. So a lot of schools have gone to a system where they now direct students to go out into the hallway, where you have uniform stations that they use instead. And they found, as in the case of Lane Community College in Oregon, that this can help to reduce trash, in Lane's case by 52% for those targeted locations. It also helps save custodial labor. They saved $25,000 in labor on an annual basis when this program went campus-wide a number of years ago. The last example I'll share is taking that same concept and applying it on a larger level, especially in outdoor settings. When you have permanent outdoor trash bins all over campus, there's oftentimes not a lot of thought put into, do we critically need trash bin in every single location. If we're going to put recycling next to every single one of those, that can be very expensive. And the assumption that you have to have lots of trash bins to avoid littering is, in many cases, has been proven not to be true. You can reduce and take away trash from certain locations, even repurpose those trash bins, repaint them, repurpose them for recycling. There are a number of universities that have successfully done that. They've lowered their operational costs without leading to more litter, and at the same time helping to increase recycling. The one example I'd cite is the University of Maryland, which they did a survey of their entire campus and determined that they could remove 200 outdoor bins alone. And in doing that, as I said, they saw no increase in litter at all. So it's not automatic. It's something that needs to be studied and done deliberatively, but it's another area to investigate and look into. So the last thing, this is just as a closing, I want to share a couple of resources that that can help in your just for further pursuing improvements to your program. In addition to Busch Systems Resource Center, the study I cited about Keep America Beautiful's desk-side recycling, that is a published study that you can find on the web at recyclingatwork.org. There's an organization, the College and University Recycling Coalition, who Busch Systems is proud to sponsor and support. They do an annual workshop in conjunction with the ASHE Higher Education Sustainability Conference, which this year will be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, coming up month after next. This is a great place where you can meet and interact with other recycling managers and see what other campuses are doing. Last thing I would share is that there is a listserv, a free listserv that's hosted by Brown University that is dedicated for recycling managers on college campuses. This is a great resource to, again, share challenges. I'm trying to do this on my campus. Has anybody else done something similar? It's a great place to share those best practices and hear from 5 or 10 other schools. Well, this is what we did in our case. You can learn more about both of those, the listserv and the workshop at kirk3r.org. And with that, I realize I've gone over my time, so I'm going to pause and hand it back to Syvannah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Alec. Some really, really great information. So we do have a question, Alec, that came through for a couple questions actually that are specific to colleges and universities. So wondering if you could just answer these ones here. So the first question, Alec, do you recommend that students or staff physically sort through the material that is placed in the wrong bin? And if so, what safety precautions must be taken to protect these students?
Sure. There could be a lot of value to doing a public waste sort. I've seen many universities do this where they will actually set up tables in the middle of their quad, and they put up signage telling people what they're doing. You can get Tyvek suits. Make sure you've got the right gloves, or you can get tongs that you can use to physically separate things. But then use that as a demonstration to show people, hey, here's what's actually in the trash, and this can be recycled or this can't. Even make a challenge out of that. Have a guessing game, make it a social media campaign. Who can guess what percentage of the paper that we pull out of the trash could have been recycled? Something like that have a little raffle prize or something that goes with it. But the idea is to engage people and use what's actually in the trash as an educational tool. This is also something that can be done with even with K through 12. You want to be sensitive to how you do that. You might want to just take wastebasket trash from offices as opposed to what's in the dumpster, just because this could be a little more sanitary. But as long as you have gloves and perhaps just have the teacher do the sorting as opposed to students, have a table where you spread things out on so that you can actually see and be able to separate things without just sticking your hands into a can where you may not be able to see what's in there beforehand. But it's definitely something that can be an effective educational tool.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. And then we have another one here. Is it important to have a bin audit? This particular woman is a new sustainability coordinator, but doesn't know where all of the bins are on campus. People regularly ask her for new bins, but it seems like she would have a better handle on where the bins are if we had a campus-wide audit. And then part two to that asks, how also do you prevent students that live on campus from taking the bins with them when they move out of their dorms?
Sure, sure. So I'll take those separately. The first one, absolutely. This is definitely part of that step of going from an ad hoc uh, system to really professionalizing it. You've got to understand what you have out there. Because even if you set a standard that you can use going forward, that might take years to actually get the budgets, and you have to buy bins and stages. But the first step is to know how many bins are you even going to need. So I've seen many universities that will make this a class project or a grad student's a project to go out and do that surveying and document where are all the locations where the bins currently are, and also create, do some mapping of where ideally should they be. Are they in the right location? We have a bin that's off in a back parking lot that nobody really uses. While meanwhile, we don't have something in the lobby of the student union. So doing that type of mapping and going location to location and really mapping those out is an important step. Also, just understanding how many different types of bins do you currently have. That could help with your strategy of deciding, well, do we eliminate certain bins in certain locations first and replace those because they are in more dilapidated. Those are all things that I definitely advocate doing. One example I'll share was the University of Wisconsin, River Falls just went through this whole process. In the last year or two, they made it a project, and I want to say they documented that they had 30 different types of bins across their campus, simply because the department would go out and buy their own at a different point. There'll be all different colors. To really even know what a recycling bin was from one location to the next was a real challenge. So a lot of value to that. To the second point that was made, so when you're looking at housing, residence halls, one of the best practices is to make sure that every room has its own little small bin, something that is just 10 or 15 quarts that holds a small number of cans and bottles of paper, but it's something that allows them to separate the recycling in the room before they walk downstairs to the dumpsters. If people don't have that and they simply put everything into one trash bin, they're much less likely to separate it when they get out to the recycling and trash bins. But to the point, the question that was being asked, you can give these bins out to students at the beginning of the semester, and boy, they sure are convenient at the end of the semester when you need to move out and you need something that you can put your clothes into, so these bins will walk off oftentimes. I think that the common step I've seen to prevent that is to include the recycling bins on the inventory of everything in the room that is part of the students' checklist when they are moving out, so that housing, when the RA comes through to make sure everything's in order, if the bin is not on there, that is something that's taken out of their deposit. And if the student does choose to take the bin with them, that at least guarantees that there's a revenue source that can be used to purchase new bins. But it's also it helps to disincentivize taking the bins in the first place.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Alec, for answering those questions. So that wraps up our webinar today. Again, like we said, this webinar was recorded, so you will be receiving an email with that recording. Thanks so much, Alec, for being a co-presenter today, and for everyone for attending. We are hosting our next webinar on September 27th that will focus on recycling for property and facility managers. So keep an eye out for registration information to come for that webinar. Both myself and Alec's contact information is up on the screen, so feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, or suggestions, and we're always open for conversation. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.